Hey, so we begin here by importing our modules, and the first module that we import is the HTTP, which allows us to transfer data from an interface, the URL, which allows us to split up a web address into readable parts, and the stream decoder, which we will use for the payload, and that allows us to decode a buffer stream and turning it into a string. We also use, we're going to set our port to 4000. And this is a router object that we'll come back to in a minute. After our imports, what we'll do is create a server by using the create server method on the HTTP module, and that takes a function here, a callback function, which we'll look at it in a second. This callback function kind of runs quite long, and then we use our server that we created to listen to our port 4000, and this is just a callback function letting us know that we're running on that port. So to look at the callback function here, essentially when our server receives a request, we do several things to parse that request. The first thing is that we use our URL module to split up that web address into its readable parts, and we use the parse method and place the results in parsed URL, and then we grab the path name, which would be a property on this object, and that's stored in path, and then we use some regex here to trim any extra spaces or characters, and the final result is stored in trimmed path. So the next step is that we grab the method from the request object and we change it to lowercase and store that in method. The next step is to grab the query, if there is one, from our parsed URL and save that in query. And finally, we will grab the headers from the request object and save that into headers. So that'll leave us with these four properties: the path, the method, the query, and the headers. The next step is to handle the stream from the payload, and we're going to use the stream decoder that we imported, and we will create a new instance of that, which we will save in decoder variable, and then here we just create our empty buffer string that we'll use to receive the data that we'll be downloading. So to decode, to begin handling that stream of data, we'll place an event listener on the request object, this .on, and we will place a specific kind of event listener, which will listen for data coming in. So when data does stream in, this callback function will be called, and any data we moved into the this argument here, this parameter here, and then we will use decoder.write to move the data into our buffer, our empty buffer variable, which won't be empty anymore. So that'll be receiving any streams that'll come in, and if we reach the end of the stream, this event handler will fire. And what this does is that this essentially does decoder.end to kind of like put a period at the end of this stream, and then it will run the rest of these commands here. And what these commands are, well, they're various things. The first thing is that we grab all our collected data here and place them into an object, or data object. Okay, and that will look something like this down here. I've printed it out. We've got our path, our query, our method, our headers, and our payload. And the last thing that we do is that we check to see what sort of path came in on the request. And so our path, our trimmed path, say, here's an example of the post that I made. In this case, our trim path would just be hello. And so what this is essentially saying is that if it will check our router object above, and if it has a hello key, then it will run this command. But if it doesn't have a hello key, then it will offer this as a kind of default key, a not found key. And so let's look at that router object. And what you have here is essentially two keys, a hello key, whose value is a function, and a not found key that also is essentially a function. So let's say so we do have a hello key. Essentially, that function, the hello function, will be stored in handler, but if it doesn't find it, then the not found function would be placed in the handler. Whichever is the case, the handler function is fired, whether it's hello or not found. And so that what this function does is it takes data and it takes a callback, and then it fires that callback, or it calls that callback, and it passes in a status code and a message object, right? So let's take a look at this. So here's where it would take that status code, and payload would be where it would take the message object. And if the message object is empty, then it will just create, or if it's undefined, it will create an empty object to return. And so then what we have here is we will stringify that payload so that we can send it via HTTP. We'll set up our response by defining it as a JSON. We will send the status, and then we will send the payload and end the response. And so that essentially is our server, and then I can test it. Okay, to test it, then what I'll do is send a hello post, a hello path, and we should get the message that we have, message anything you want. So send, and we do get that message here, and we've sent back a 406 status, and we have our 406 here. So if I try to send a path that's not on our our router registry here, like hello 5 or hello 6, send that. We get an empty object, so I didn't place an object in here, and we get our 404 not found. Let me place an object in here to see what might how this might work. Okay, I've saved that, and let me restart the server and go back here and run this hello 6 again. So we have our message not found, 404. Cool. And anything else that I have on here? Well, when I sent this post, I did send this payload here, this name key, my name as a value, and it does appear here on the bottom, name value.